Have you given any consideration to women? I've never heard you talk about that. And finally, I'm still at it on Chirchir. You have only given the comparison of Kenya and other countries and how we are doing better. Is there any other way you can do it better instead of just giving comparison? You have also talked about the opaqueness in prices. What do we do about that as a person and as CS in charge of that? I think I'll come back later. Thank you.
Yeah, mine is going to be very, very short because a lot has been addressed. I just want to know, because in today's daily nation business of today, there is a suggestion that over 6,000 foreign investors flee Nairobi Security Exchange in 9 months. Is this true? And if this is the case, what could be the cause? Two, I've come to notice from my office in Parliament that since the current projection on the housing, Mr. Chinga, the current projection to the housing fund is about to Kenya shillings 74 billion, if I'm not wrong. And yet there's a proposal to reduce this by about Kenya shillings 10 billion in the current supplementary budget. If this is true, what would be the basis for this reduction, since you have stated declared that this housing levy is going to continue? How is it being reduced midstream? Yeah. Then, what is the current collections to the housing fund? Yeah, that's the point for us to know. Yeah. And what framework are you putting in place to defray expenditure from the fund? Finally, there's this vexed question of the exchange rate, Professor Ndumu. Try to explain to me as a layman, really, all that has been said. Then why is it the case that the value of the Kenya shilling is equally depreciating against the other East African currencies? Try to break it down to me. Assume I'm just a layman who doesn't understand those fundamentals. Okay? Yes. Now, finally, Professor Ndumu, of course, as a scholar, assume for the last 10 months or so, it's now a year actually, since the coming into being of the current administration, when all is said and done, and after all the experiments, if I may call them so, yeah, what in your view is working and what is not working? And what can you possibly consider doing to address this issue of high cost of living? Because as you know, it's one issue that won't be swept under the carpet very easily. It won't. Okay? So can we leave this meeting with some practical suggestions or recommendations on what the government is going to do to reduce the cost of living? Or do we give up and throw our hands in the air to machine work? Then the people can decide for themselves what to do. Thank you.
Well done. I think Senator Mgen, and then would we allow Bilo to try and make it? I think you can be very brief, yeah? Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Now, the first one is to CS Energy. From the table that I have before me, fuel lands at a cost of 123. When you add taxes, it goes to 217. And it seems taxation on fuel can have an impact on tax collection. I read last week that KRA has missed its target on fuel by 1.2 billion in the first quarter of 2023-2024. And that's a negative effect on our desire to collect taxes. Now, CS, this is the statistics. That's the real position on the ground. What should be the way forward, bearing in mind also that these high taxes have a very high cost, a very high impact on the cost of living. Number two, this issue of subsidy related to the 80 shillings that Kenyans pay as a tax per litre of fuel they consume. They understand it, subsidy is a measure the government puts in place to lower the cost of fuel or the price of fuel so that you cushion the general public. Now, we all agree that the cost of fuel is beyond the reach of many Kenyans as we speak. Some countries like Mexico, President Lopez is using subsidy to cushion the citizen. Doesn't the government feel the pain of Kenyans, the suffering of Kenyans, to consider this issue of subsidy? Now, to the CS Treasury, this process has been very consultative, CS Ndungu. This is maybe to CS Ndungu and housing. Now, listen to the situation on the ground. The chair of public service told us that because of this sudden increase in taxes, including what you are calling an investment on housing levy, civil servants are undergoing serious depression. And those are the Kenyans you tax to give service. They are undergoing serious depression. These are the statistics from the public service itself. About 12,532 public officers have sought psychosocial support in the financial year 2022-2023, a steep rise from a figure of 6,600 in the previous financial year 2018-2019. In terms of what in their pocket, Hinga, is that about 17,000 of the public servants are earning less than 1/3, and they will never benefit from this very ambitious housing development agenda of UDA. So they are not going to be able to take mortgages for the houses you are building. Now, two proposals have been put on the table. The first one is the public service itself, and these are policy shift even as we are waiting for the cost case. They propose that to cushion these poor public officers, you consider housing levy to be taxed at basic, not gross. That has come from the public service itself, control of budget, and parliamentary budget office. The second one is even more, I think, maybe controversial and reasonable. The public service argues that this investment you are doing, there are a number of public officers who have already taken mortgages, and you cannot force them to take another mortgage. Their payslip can't take that mortgage. And the public service is proposing that they should be exempted from this additional housing levy so that you give relief to them and boost their performance. What would be your comment? If you permit me, I will ask Biro Kero. Biro Kero, we have worked together before in anti-corruption, and the statistics that we have as Kenyans is that Fuliza has grown spontaneously since the launch of the ASLA fund. How do you explain this when the government has opined that the ASLA fund has been fairly successful? And then maybe finally, there is a comment that was made here by the controller of budget that at times we budget for corruption. This is to you, CS Treasury. Now, state corporation budgets really, according to the control of budget, can be a conduit for corruption on government money. That being the problem, CS, what would be your recommendation on the way forward? Because the people who have spoken here have said corruption actually contributes largely to the high cost of living. Then the El Nino allocation, CS, has this money been spent or it's lying somewhere? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we can now begin answering sessions, but not before I make just a small comment. You know, I was not here the day Margaret Nyakango made her confessions, or so to speak, but I find her confession to be a typical Kenyan problem. If you read our constitution, Article 228(5), on the responsibilities and the roles of a controller of budget. Allow me just to read it verbatim so that we have it on record. The controller shall not approve any withdrawal from a public fund unless satisfied that the withdrawal is authorized by law. So here you have the person that the Constitution has given the responsibility of ensuring that any withdrawal from the public kitty is her mandate. Then she comes before the committee and tells us, I have seen this being budgeted elsewhere and I don't know how money is being lost. Surely, with that confession, I thought probably we should have asked her to resign. Because if you are allowing withdrawals through what is now being revealed to the committee and called budgeted corruption, then it means either you're incompetent or you are part and parcel of those that are stealing from us.
Order.
Yeah, and order.
Honorable Chairs, there's a statement which is circulating attributed to the CS for National Treasury. It's dated today. It's a statement in response to the allegations by the controller of budget. I just wanted to answer Professor Ndungu, perhaps address the issue in your statement, because it has just come before us now, on page 2, where you claim that for financial year 2022-2023, approved budget for personal allowances for the office of the controller of budget was Kenya shilling 7.3 million, which was reduced to Kenya shilling 700,000 in the supplementary budget. Yet actual expenditure was only Kenya shillings 50,000. And now come this financial year, you still go ahead to budget for Kenya shilling 7.5 million. What would have informed this budgeting if the previous financial year, the only expenditure was 50,000 shillings? Down from a budget of 7.3 million. Is this what Nyakango was talking about? Finally, thanks.
Yeah, and I think
I will answer that, Your Excellency, because I think we are looking at personal allowances and salaries differently. Yes. So I have itemized that. Yeah.
Yet, Prof, before you answer, I want us to lift the work of this committee beyond incriminating other people, because we may not have the ability, I mean, unless we call them for come and respond. I think there's a principle in law which says at some stage, let the laws lie where it belongs or where it is. I would therefore, I know that Aaron feels very strongly about this, but I think we need to be able to moderate even ourselves, because there'll be things which may be unpalatable. We've heard of new and old state capture. We have heard all those things, and without even bringing names. So I personally think that we should avoid a situation where we reduce this session into discussion of the control of budget. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think Aaron was alluding to a statement where he was not there in present, but is just giving a comment on the same. This is the same control of budget who said she was sent SMSs to withdraw 7 billion shillings and kind of thing.
Via WhatsApp.
Via WhatsApp. So
anyway, I think Bilo had requested to have the first bite so that he can leave. And since you are my budget and finance committee chair, Bilo,
I'll comment.
Please make a comment on that issue. Office of the Control of Budget, so that we are able to know whether what she is alleging is true, or we need to be a bit more prudent with our public officers.
Very well. Thank you very much, Chairman. If you, I think, were there earlier, I did actually talk about that and say the buck stops with the control of budget, because no money can be withdrawn without our express approval, as you read very clearly. So I think...
Yet below, it's not a matter of withdrawal of monies from what we had from the controller.
The one on the budget.
Because we should talk about personal emoluments.
The MP raised.
Yes.
I think it's very important.
Okay.
The challenge we have, Mr. Chairman, is Treasury is required to use zero-based budgeting. Then they would look at what did this person spend last year? 50,000? Yes, 50,000. But when you go by incremental system, how much was the budget office last year? The budget figure in the estimates was 7.5. They just start from 7.5 and add something. So this is part of the challenges we have. But it's very clear that notwithstanding whatever has been budgeted, Mr. Chairman, whether it's repeated, her salary is repeated 3 times or 4 times, no withdrawal can be done without approval from the control of budget. I think that's very clear. So in other words, if that money is lost, if for whatever reason somebody used her name to withdraw money, then I think clearly her office would know and should be in a position to. So very close, very, very quickly, Chairman, the questions which were asked. On the hustler, let me start from, not in any particular order, but very quickly. I think that the main challenge on the uptake of hustler, why it's not, in my view, as successful as Fuliza is because it did not meet the expectations for whatever reasons. I think people expected probably the amounts to be higher, or but the fact that the interest rates is only 8%, and Fuliza has much more, has a higher percentage, did not stop Kenyans from continuing with Fuliza. And now you'll see that in Fuliza the default rate is nil. With Hustler the default rate is 20%. And the uptake is low, and this is why Treasury, I think, probably was able to reduce it to 5 billion. So I think probably the expectations people had from government.
On a lighter note, I heard C.S. Ndungu say he's actually a member of Hustler Fund. Well, I think he does that as a minister responsible, maybe to monitor the uptake or whatever.
Yes.
But so, I think Mr. Professor Ndungu cannot be that kind of a hustler.
But it's important that we take note, underline what the CS Treasury said about market. Let us incentivize the markets to do their work. If we really looked at what Fuliza is doing, and government looked at, start with Fuliza and probably looked at some of the challenges, they would not need to allocate money to do Fuliza's work. If government looked at incentivize the housing, the construction, the contractors, in terms of tax remissions, in terms of granting bank facilities or lower, bank, so I think then you would not have needed Kenyans to be taxed, 1.5 plus 3% to fund housing. I think the market thing, Bwana CS, Treasury, if it is important that you put your foot down on your colleagues, that let us not try and do everything as government, because that money will come from taxpayers and we don't have the money. On the IPP, Mr. Chairman, I only want to comment and say that there was a very, very good report in September last year on the independent power purchase agreement by the task force, the presidential task force. We need that one to be implemented. It will address all the challenges we have discussed here. Do we have the political will to implement that power purchase agreement task force report, which was very clear, and eminent Kenyans actually spent a lot of time coming up with what needs to be done to address that matter. On the dollar, I think what the CS, I would advise the CS Treasury to do is, even now under his watch, the challenge that the reason why Kenyans are keeping $8 billion in their commercial bank accounts, and they're not, selling it to the bank, is because of the existence of the dual exchange rate. It is there up to now. Let him do away with that. Why would central bank tell you that the exchange rate is 150? When you go and want to buy it is 156, 157. So I think if that is not there, nobody will keep that money. So the question of the shortage or the would disappear. The tax review I have suggested, that there are actually taxes which are critical, and the most common ones are the levies. These levies are called levies, but they're in forms of taxes, and they're not being used for the purposes for which they were originally intended. This is why I said some of those levies need to be reviewed and need to be removed, really, and they're not adding value except making the cost of production higher. And the ones for fuel has been mentioned, for example, and the ones I have mentioned, things like the one for Agricultural Food Authority, the one RDL, Railway Development, which really it's not being used to service that loan, and so forth. So I think those are some of the taxes that, in my view, needs to be reviewed. Then on the market, the dollar is still on the dollar. I heard the CSA, this thing was managed. But let me tell you, in any country, because of external shocks, to insulate the economy, the manufacturers and businessmen and everyone from sudden volatility, any country you go in this world, central banks do intervene in the exchange rate to avoid that sudden volatility. It is normal. If, for example, the shilling today goes to 200, central bank cannot just sit and wait. Tomorrow, people who are doing businesses, there'll be chaos. You have to try and go to the market. And this is what I think has been happening in the past. And I think that can still happen. But what we are seeing is that there's need to really address that issue. My worry is that government of Kenya seems to depend on IMF. That IMF tells you your sharing is overvalued, and so we just go back and say, okay, and relax. But I think we need to look at the economy critically and to avoid that kind of thing. Mr. Chairman, 2 or 3 others I just want to mention very quickly. One, for the cost of living. For cost of living, I think, and I've said it very clearly in my report, we must review every policy and regulatory proposal in terms of its impact on the cost of living before cabinet and parliament approval is sought. I think this is important. Because you see every day, a department, a ministry, coming up with something. We're going to introduce this. We're going to charge this. We're going to change this. Every change of policy that has an impact on the cost of living should not be taken, to cabinet and parliament until it has been examined clearly in terms of its impact on the cost of living. I think this is important. There was a bill last year in 2021 before Parliament to amend the PFM, Public Finance Management Act, to give members of Parliament to require that all loans must get prior approval from Parliament before Treasury signs the dotted lines. I think that is critical, gentlemen and ladies. This is critical. Otherwise, we will continue getting Parliament as a rubber stamp, approving loans which have been signed in London, in Korea, in Japan, anywhere. And, I think it's something that law needs to be revisited. It's critical. Chairman, very quickly, the last 2 I want to mention is that, in my view, to address these challenges on the economy, because there is a disconnect between what Kenyans feel about the state of the economy and what needs to be done and what the government thinks. I think it's time we have a national convention on the status of the economy with the right stakeholders. You have to get, the people who are in business, you have to get the professional and business organizations and forums, you have to get the farmers, the industries, and so forth. Let us discuss really this issue about our economy, because there are challenges. Government does not engage adequately with business. That is the challenge. And so we can't just as government come up with rules and regulations, and then businesses feel there sometimes. And there are sectors where people are engaged, but I think there are many, and there's benefit. It will give government an opportunity also to listen to the farmers, listen to the industry, to investors, to SMEs. That is very important. Instead of just a top-down approach. Lastly, I think I want to conclude by saying that the question of spending, as Dr. Ruto said, is critical. Unless we cut our clothes to our size, we will continue to be talking in these forums. And I think the argument by Treasury, and I heard what the CS said, that we cannot just, which expenses will be cut. I think clearly what we know is that if you take a pen and paper and go through the printed estimates, really, there are things which are not a priority. There are things which you can defer. Even needs can be deferred so that you don't get into a bigger crisis. I think it's important we review the question of spending so that we can keep this country in one piece. Otherwise, we will go over the precipice. This is my thoughts. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Honorable Okero. Do we follow that order?
Yeah.
We follow that order. Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Abram.
Thank you, Co-Chairs. I was asked two questions. One, Bilo has responded to a bit, but first I was asked, is it true that 80% of Kenyans, I want to also encourage the PS for housing to refer to national statistics. He referred to documents by other people out there. We have a national census 2019, which is what we use. This is what it says. There are 12.1 million households in this country. They are divided between rural and urban. Rural are 7.4, urban are 4.7. 86%, that is 6.3 in rural, own their own homes. That's the figure I was referring to. Maybe just to clarify that. Yes, 86. And if you had my comment, I was saying, what is the need in the rural areas for building houses? Because he said he has written to every member of parliament asking for land. I don't think even any MP owns land in the first place, public land, but that's a story for another day. And 21